Metzora, Leper, God's trumpet call presence, 5th reading from the Book of Leviticus, 28th reading from Torah. Outline of Torah portion. Purification of lepers, Leviticus chapter 14 verse 1 to 32. In the previous Torah portion, Tazria, we learned that Zarat is not a normal physical disease, but a divine punishment for evil speech. The laws of Zarat, or biblical leprosy as some call it, have a spiritual application. Zarat include various types of skin conditions and mildew which can appear on people and in fabrics and on leather articles. Only the priests were trained and qualified to diagnose the conditions. They followed the guidelines given to them in Leviticus chapter 13 for examining and diagnosing the afflicted person. Only the priest could declare an afflicted person clean or unclean based on these guidelines. In Leviticus chapter 14, the laws concerning the cleansing of the leper are discussed. The disease caused a person to be unfit, and the purification was necessary to make him ritually fit. Examination of the leper. The person afflicted by Zarat lived outside the camp. Leviticus chapter 13 verse 46. If these symptoms of Zarat have receded, then the infected person sends for a priest to examine him. If the priest finds the infected person is clean, then he begins the purification process, after which the person afflicted will be declared clean. He will be returned to a state of ritual fitness and sent back to the society. If the priest finds him unclean, he remains unclean until he will be re-examined. Purification procedure, stage 1. Priest shall command to take for him who is to be cleansed the necessary elements: 2 live clean birds, branch of cedar wood, hyssop plant, crimson wool, and clay pot of living water. Purification of lepers, continuation. Why are live birds used for this cleansing rite? According to Rashi's suggestion, the Zarat came as a result of derogatory speech done by chattering. Therefore, for his cleansing, the person is required to bring birds which twitter constantly with chirping sounds. Why a cedar stick? Cedar tree, tall and lofty, represented the haughty spirit. Zarat came because of haughtiness. A haughty spirit makes a person arrogant and full of pride. It makes an individual to act like he is better than other people. He does not see his own weaknesses. Because of pride, people speak negative of others. In Psalms 101 it says, "One who secretly slanders a neighbor, I will destroy. A haughty look and an arrogant heart I will not tolerate." The metaphor of a cedar as a haughty person comes from Isaiah chapter 2 verses 12 and 13, which states, "The Lord Almighty has a day in store for the proud and lofty, for all that is exalted, and they will be humbled. For all the cedars of Lebanon, tall and lofty, and all the oaks of Bashan." We need to be careful of how we speak. We need to guard our tongue. Even in the midst of a conversation, if you find your enemy is being criticized of his faults, do not join them and do not go down that road, but take the higher path and quit criticizing your enemy. Humility and integrity will emerge better on the long run. Why a strip of crimson wool and hyssop? The person infected with Zarat must humble himself from his haughtiness, just as a worm which infested the berries from which the crimson dye was extracted to color wool. According to Rashi, the wool colored in this dye was used in the purification ceremony to remind the gossipers and slanderers to humble themselves like the worm which infested the berries. Rashi suggests that hyssop plant was used in the purification ritual because it is lowly and humble. It reminds us that the individual getting healed of Zarat must have a lowly and a humble spirit. In 1 Kings chapter 4 verse 33, the Bible contrasts the hyssop plant growing on a lowly place to the cedar that grows in Lebanon. Hyssop represent opposite character of a cedar. The individual that was with the Zarat should be humble and lowly. In Psalms 51 verse 7 it states, "Purify me with hyssop, and I shall be clean." What is living water? The purification ritual requires living water in a clay pot. The Hebrew phrase Ma'im Haim is translated as running water. The correct translation would be living water. Rivers, streams, springs, and rainwater are forms of Ma'im Haim. Torah is sometimes referred to as living water. Torah keeps us fresh, renew us, and keep us spiritually clean. In John chapter 7 verse 38, Yeshua HaMashiach said, "Whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, rivers of living water will flow from within them." Continuation of purification procedure for leper. Priest slaughters one of the birds over the clay vessel of living water. Priest bundles the second bird together with the piece of cedar wood and scarlet yarn and the hyssop branch and dips them in water and blood solution. The priests use the bundled elements to sprinkle the leper 7 times with the blood and water solution. The living bird is released in the open field. The leper shaves off all the hair off his head, his beard, and his eyebrows. The leper immerses himself in a mikvah of living water, washes his garments, and a full body immersion. Leper may now return to the camp, living in public view but outside his tent. Purification procedures stage 2, returning to the home. At the end of the week, the leper again shaves off his head, immerses himself in a mikvah, living water, washes his garments, washes himself, full body immersion. Leper may return to the tent but not to the sanctuary. Purification procedure stage 3, returning to the sanctuary. On the 8th day, leper shall take 2 male lambs without blemish, 1 female lamb in its first year without defect, 6½ quarts of fine flour for a grain offering, mixed with oil, and 2/3 pint of olive oil. The priest purifying him is to place the person being purified with these items before Adonai at the entrance to the tent of meeting. The priest is to take one of the male lambs and offer it as a guilt offering with the 2/3 pint of olive oil, then wave them as a wave offering before Adonai. Continuation of purification procedure for lepers. The priest slaughter the male lamb for the guilt offering at the place in the sanctuary for slaughtering sin offerings and burnt offerings. Blood is applied to the altar. Some blood is retained for the cleansing. The priest applies the lamb's blood of the guilt offering to the leper on the tip of the right ear, right thumb, and right toe. The priest is to take some of the 2/3 pint of olive oil and pour it into the palm of his own left hand. Dip his right finger in the oil that is in his left hand and sprinkle oil with his finger 7 times before the Lord. The priest is to put some of the remaining oil in his hand, on the tip of the right ear, on the thumb of his right hand, on the big toe of his right foot, and on the blood of the guilt offering. The priest is to put the rest of the oil in his hand on the head of the person being purified. The priest offers a female lamb as a sin offering and makes atonement for the person being purified because of his uncleanness. The male lamb as the burnt offering and the grain offering on the altar. And the priest will make atonement for him, and he will be clean, ritually fit to enter the sanctuary and fit to participate in the sacrifices. If the leper is poor and cannot afford the elements prescribed. Diagnosis of leprosy separated the leper from the community for a long time. We can suppose that many lepers were poor and could not afford 3 lambs for sacrifice. If the leper is poor, he could bring 1 male lamb instead of 3 lambs in place of other 2 lambs. He could bring 2 birds, turtle doves, or pigeons. Offering was brought to the door of the tabernacle of meeting before the Lord. The same place, same manner as a rich man would do. The offering of the lamb for the trespass offering for the poor man and the application of the sacrificial blood was the same as verses 12 to 14. Application of the oil for the ritual of the poor man was the same as described in verses 15 to 18. The carrying out of the sin offering and the burnt offering was the same as described in verses 19 and 20. Presentation of the grain offering was the same as mentioned in verse 20. Cleansing a leprous house. Moles, mildew, and fungus. Leviticus chapter 14 verse 33 to 53. Leviticus chapter 14 verse 33 to 53 describe the procedure for diagnosing and cleansing a home in which signs of biblical leprosy has appeared on the walls. Not all mold and mildew are leprous, but many molds, mildew, or fungi can be dangerous if touched or breathed in. And during winter and rainy seasons, it could cause severe problems. The laws provided a sound sanitary practice and promoted the health of the community of Israel. The procedure is almost the same as that of diagnosing a leper. The house suspected of leprosy. The priest is called to inspect the house. Priest command the owners to empty the house. Priest shall go in to examine the walls and the plague. He will take into consideration the color, the nature of the mold, mildew, or fungus. If the priest find the walls that are affected potentially leprous, then the house is quarantined for 7 days. No one is to enter the house. The priest return to re-examine after 7 days. If the affected area has spread even more, priest will command the stones in which the plague is be removed from the house. It is to be cast into an unclean place outside the city. The house is to be scraped inside all around, and the dust shall be put in an unclean place outside the city. New stones will be put in place of those removed, and take other mortar and replaster the house. Cleansing a leprous house. Continuation. If the infection reappears and breaks out in the house, the priest is to declare the house unclean. House will be torn down, its stones, timber, and plaster. It will be removed to an unclean place outside the city. He who goes into the house while it is shut up shall be unclean till evening. He who lies down in the house shall wash his clothes. He who eats in the house shall wash his clothes. If the leprosy does not occur, house is clean, and purification ceremony can be initiated. Purification ceremony for the house. The same ritual prescribed in verses 4 to 7 for the cleansing of a leper was also to be performed when a house was declared clean from a plague of mold, mildew, or fungus. Priest obtains the necessary elements for the purification ritual: 2 live clean birds, branch of cedar wood, hyssop plant, crimson wool, clay pot of living water. Priest slaughters one of the birds over the vessel of the living water. He bundles the remaining elements together and dips them in the water and blood solution. Priest uses the package of elements to sprinkle the house 7 times with the blood and water. Live bird is released outside the city on the open field. The priest will pronounce that house cleansed. Summary of the laws of leprosy. Summary statement includes the section of Leviticus chapter 13 and 14 dealing with skin diseases, other diseases, mold, mildew, and fungus, categorized as leprosy for the children of Israel. Law concerning bodily discharge. Leviticus chapter 15 discusses the laws concerning bodily discharge. The topic is not addressed much, but they are given in the Torah and needs to be studied and understood. Nevertheless, application of these commandments on a community level today without the tabernacle and the temple would be a misapplication. The principle regarding an abnormal bodily discharge. When a man has a discharge, abnormal genital discharge, indicating a disease from his body, his discharge is unclean. A venereal type of discharge is called zav. This condition made a man ritually unfit. The uncleanness associated with a person with zav was spread through contact. Therefore, it could be transmitted to a bed, to where he sat, or by direct touches. 3 ways a person or a thing might be made unclean. First level, uncleanness of the man afflicted with the abnormal genital discharge. Second level, an object or a person who came into contact with the afflicted one. Third level, someone who came in contact with an object that was made unclean. Uncleanness could also be spread through saliva. When the unclean comes into contact with the clean, it is the clean that is made unclean. People or things made unclean on the second or third level could be purified by a ceremonial washing of the object and the person involved. Their uncleanness remained only until evening. Law concerning bodily discharge. Continuation. When a man with zav is cleansed of his discharge, he shall count 7 days from his last discharge. He is to wash his clothes, bathe his body in running water. Then he shall be clean. On the 8th day he shall bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons before the Lord to the door of the tabernacle of meeting. One will be offered as a sin offering, not for sin, but for his ritual purification. The other as a burnt offering. Priest shall make atonement for him. Priest will pronounce him fit and will be reinitiated to the worship. Normal bodily discharge from a man. If a man has an emission of semen, either accidentally or in sex, he had to cleanse himself and respect a brief time of ceremonial uncleanness. This is not God condemning sex. Sexual relations with one spouse is what God created. Yet it makes both husband and wife unfit. They shall bathe and be unclean until evening. This law was a powerful way to prevent Israelites from sexual and spiritual corruption that existed in the ancient world. Under this law of Moshe, any emission of semen was unclean and could not be associated with the working of the tabernacle or temple. These laws separated Israel from sexual and spiritual practices of the pagan world. Law concerning bodily discharge. Law concerning bodily discharge for a woman. If a woman has a discharge and the discharge is blood, her normal menstruation, she shall be set apart 7 days. Whoever touches her shall be unclean until evening. Everything that she lies on during her impurity shall be unclean. Everything that she sits on shall be unclean. Whoever touches her bed shall wash his clothes and bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. Whoever touches anything that she sat on shall wash his clothes and bathe in water, and be unclean till evening. Anything on her bed or on anything on which she sits, when he touches it, he shall be unclean till evening. If a man lies with her, he shall be unclean for 7 days, and every bed on which he lies shall be unclean. Menstruation makes a woman ritually unfit. Her period of menstruation and resulting ritual unfitness is referred to as nida. The period of nida begins with the first show of menstruation and continues for 7 days, even if the menstrual flow lasts few days. For 7 days she is designated as nida. Leviticus chapter 18, verse 19 prohibits sexual relations with a woman in nida. Having sexual relations with a woman in her nida fall to the category of incest. Abstaining from sexual immorality was one of the standards given to the Gentiles as well by the apostles in the minimum standards given to them in Acts chapter 15. Woman with an unusual or abnormal bodily discharge. If a woman has a discharge of blood for many days other than her normal menstrual cycle, or her monthly period extends beyond 7 days of nida, it is regarded as zava. In these conditions, she is ritually unfit and transmit ritual unfitness. In temple times, a zava had to count off 7 clean days, 7 days of ceremonial impurity, immerse in living water, and on the 8th day to bring 2 birds for offering, 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, one as a sin offering and the other as a burnt offering, to complete her purification. Then she could return to a state of ritual fitness. A woman in zava shall continue as though in her menstrual impurity. Sexual relations with a woman in zava were forbidden until 7 clean days had elapsed from her last day of bleeding. Summary of the laws of bodily discharge. In this way, you will separate the people of Israel from their uncleanness, so that they will not die in a state of uncleanness for defiling my tabernacle which is there with them. Torah begins to emphasize on what makes a person ritually unfit or ritually fit. After the deaths of Aaron's sons Nadab and Abihu, on the first day of worship in the newly dedicated tabernacle, children of Israel saw the glory of God. Also experienced that God is a consuming fire. It showed the danger involved in entering the tabernacle, coming into the presence of a holy God. The laws are safety measures for the worshippers to observe when they come into the presence of God, His dwelling place, the tabernacle. God did not want the worshippers to die in their uncleanness and defile God's tabernacle. The laws of ritual fitness are not observed today because there is no temple. Nevertheless, the laws demonstrate our obligation and responsibility to conduct ourselves in moral purity, responsibility towards others as well as ourselves. Yeshua HaMashiach said, "Blessed are those who are pure in heart, for they shall see God." Observing His commandments help us to have a clean heart, a heart that is ritually fit.